How's it going? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I don't have any debate or anything. I just have a question. And you may have actually talked about this already. So if you have, my apologies, and you can just shoot me away. I'll find the other reference. But what do you think about Luce from the Catholic Church? And then
About what?
About Luce, or I guess that's the name.
We already covered that like 3 live streams back. I made fun of it.
Oh,
for, I made fun of it for an hour.
Oh, gotcha. Well, let me ask you this follow on. What do you think about secular art, like art that's not blessed by a priest, being used to promote Christianity?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with Christian art. It's just that the canons of the Orthodox Church were set up to dictate the liturgical worship practice. And by the way, it's not even the Seventh Council that first starts to rule on this. It's actually the Council of Trullo. Trullo in Canon 82 is one of the first canons of the Church to specify what's appropriate and not appropriate to the liturgical worship of the Church in terms of imagery and iconography. And so the Church, even at that time, forbade pagan art in Canon 82. I think they talk about pagan styles of art, and then that becomes the basis, in part, for the theology of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. So for the Orthodox Church in the East, Trullo was pretty much seen as an ecumenical council, and even Pope John VIII pretty much agreed with everything that was in Trullo, including the elements, if I recall, relating to married priests. And it's only much later that the Vatican, the papacy, rejects elements of Trullo. But the Seventh Ecumenical Council affirms Trullo. So once again, we see that the principles of iconography in the Seventh Council aren't made up by the Seventh Council. They actually go back to Quinisex Trullo Council. And even earlier, you have, for example, Canon 73 of Trullo mentions sacred art and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and keeping pagan art out of the Church. Now, what's considered pagan art? Well, when you look at if you go to the Vatican, which I've been to the Vatican, I've been to the Vatican Museum and all of that, you'll notice all kinds of nudies and boobies and tiny peepees. I guess everybody in the Roman Catholic Church has tiny peepees because all the artwork in Rome is all like micropeens. But I know that makes sense. Maybe that's why they are the way they are. But when you go inside the Vatican, when you go into St. Peter's, and you see naked people everywhere. Do you think the ancient church had nudies everywhere? Had boobs and butts, and they're all fat people, by the way.
Yeah, I've been there. It's crazy.
Yeah, that has nothing to do at all with what the Seventh Ecumenical Council lays down, and what that shows us is that all the way back to even earlier than the Renaissance papacy, the Western Church gave verbal credence to the teaching of Trullo in the Seventh Ecumenical Council when it came to iconography. They never understood or accepted the theology of the council, because the theology of the Seventh Ecumenical Council is literally bound up with our Christology, our fasting and ascetic practices. In other words, what's appropriate for in the Church. Obviously, nude people everywhere is not appropriate for the Church. Hence why they have all this nonsense of histrionic women saints, right? And spiritual orgasms. None of that exists in the Orthodox Church. I'm being serious. Teresa of Avila and all those people, right? That's because the Roman Church only gave verbal credence to the Seventh Ecumenical Council and never cared about the actual theology, and banning pagan art for iconographic purposes. So sacred art is fine. It just has no place. In other words, like Christian artwork. I'm going to paint, Paul preaching in a, I don't know, Rembrandt style where Paul's preaching, right, to the pagans or something. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It just doesn't belong in the liturgical setting of the Church.
I gotcha. It wouldn't be blessed by a priest at that point, and then of course you couldn't use it like in the Church.
Well, I don't know what you mean by blessed by a priest, because I mean you could say that like the imagery is. Like, for example, it depends, right? So, like, this image, for example, the famous image of, Adam and Eve God touching Adam. This is a heterodox image because it's presenting God, the Father, as if he's this old man that creates Adam. When Adam is created on the image and in the prototype of Christ. There is no incarnate God the Father. The Father is never incarnate, you see.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, and if you read the later icon count, in the 1600s, in Russia, they had really big icon councils. They're not ecumenical councils, but they're still very important for Orthodox iconography. And they were having to deal with Jesuit-promoted Western heterodox iconography coming into Russia and Eastern churches. And the point was that a lot of these icons were intended to teach filioque. And so you have in the Orthodox Church, you have heterodox icons, and there's many of them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there's one called I forget all the names. This is in volume 2 of the Losky-Ouspensky book on icons. There's a whole chapter on heterodox icons, and part of the decision again had to do with not having images of God the Father. So anyway, does that answer your questions?
That does. I really appreciate that, Jay.